Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another video of the My Chosen Verse. Today we have our co-director of the Public Quran Campaign, Professor Abdel Haleem, who is worldwide known for his translation of the Quran published by the Oxford University Press. And his chosen verse today is one which he's been thinking about lately. He has lots of verses that go through his head all the time. And this verse is the verse famously about men are al-qawwamuna ala-nisa. The men are supporters of women. And I will just ask him to dive into it. Professor Haleem, how are you?
Alhamdulillah. Well, this verse, which is verse number 34 in chapter 4 of the Quran, is very famous, I suppose. So many people would think of this verse more than anything else, especially as it goes on to say, or so they think, or hit the wife, hitting the wife. They say this is violent, domestic violence, and it really is notorious according to them. And this is what they know about the verse, really, when in fact it is not about that at all. The verse is part of a long section of chapter 4, which actually talks about finances, rights of people. It starts by saying you should give women their rights, give the dowry when you marry them, you should give the orphans their rights, and do not try to consume it, mixing it with your own property. As you see, the Arabs, they used to have guardians for orphans. Orphans may have property, so they mix them and say we are looking after the money for the orphans. The Quran is very strict on this. And then it goes on to talk about God having given share to women and share to men in inheritance. Okay? And then it proceeds to talk about how much is given to each. People think that women take the share of men. That again is misconception, because only in limited number of cases a woman takes half the share of a man. This has been established. Someone has gone through the whole process and said out of 30 cases, only 4 of them you have this distinction between, according to gender, between men and women. And in these cases, like for instance, the brother takes double the share of his sister. And in these cases, actually, it is because of the financial obligation placed on the brothers. He will have to maintain his wife, his family, sometimes his parents, and his sister takes half the share for her, just pocket money, because she doesn't have to spend this on anyone. She's married to someone else, her husband has to maintain her, etc., etc. And even when she goes poor later on, when she becomes poor, her brother, who had taken double her share from the beginning, can be forced by court to maintain her. And then it goes through all the varieties of shares of inheritance: grandfather, fathers, grandmothers, wives, etc. Then it talks about marriage and who you can marry and who you cannot marry and so on, and goes back to talk about finances. For instance, Quran saying, who believe, do not consume each other's properties wrongly between yourselves, because this is should not be done. And it leads to even may kill each other if you do this. Then it goes on to talk further about giving each heir his or her rights, and no one should diminish that or stop that. Then it goes on to talk about family, husband and wife. This verse 44 of 34, which says, الرجال قوامون على النساء. People, translators, most translators would say, men are, some translators anyway, men are superior to women, which is far from the truth. الرجال means the husbands within the family. والنساء means the wives within the family. That is the nature of the Arabic language. In classical Arabic, you can't say زوج, because زوج refers to the husband and to the wife. Both of them are called زوج. So you can't say زوج should give to زوج. No. So it says الرجال, الرجال within the family, husband and wives. قوامون, again, you have all sorts of translation for this. Some say managers and things like that. This Arbery, I think, said managers. Others may say even worse than that. Well, in fact, this is wrong because of the context which maintainer, to maintain financially. And there are hadiths in which this word is used. A man who married, and the Prophet asked him, a young man, he said to him, have you got married? Yes. He said to him, a girl or an older woman? He said, an older woman. Yani, you were married before. Prophet said, oh, young man, why didn't you marry? You shouldn't have married. You should have married a young girl whom you can play with her and she plays with you. So the answer was, my father died leaving 5 or more young girls. And I thought if I bring a young woman, young wife, she will be just like one of them. I decided to get an older woman who will be تقوم عليهن. تقوم عليهن means, and he goes on to explain, she would keep them clean, comb their hair, and look after them. That is what قوامون means. The husbands are قوامون على النساء. Take care of them. Now, in my translation, I said, husbands should take good care of their wives. People might think, how on earth can you translate it like that? But this is the proper translation according to the Arabic grammar rules. Nominal sentence in the sense of order. There are many sentences like this in the Quran, given as a nominal sentence, but it really is an order. Like, mother suckle their children, just like that, suckle their babies. It really means they should suckle, and this is the normal, expected ways that mother suckle their babies. الرجال قوامون على النساء means men should, the husbands should take good care of their wives, particularly financially, because this is the context of this section. It goes on to say, how can they do it? Through what? Through the extra share which God has given them. فضل. فضل here means he had given them an extra share in the inheritance. That is what it means, and this is what is used one verse earlier than that, in that sense. فضل. Not that God has made men superior or giving them, favored them more than women. No. So they maintain them, take good care of them through the extra share they have been given and what they pay with their own money. Fine. Then it goes on to talk about the two kinds of wives. Two kinds of wives. Talks about the good ones first. It says the good salihat, the good wives are obedient to God, not to the husband. Are obedient to God. They obey God in what He counsels or orders, or they are obedient to God, and they guard what God have guarded, even when unseen. للغيب means when unseen, when their husband is not there. They guard what God has guarded. What is this? Does this refer to? It refers to two things. It refers to her chastity in the absence of the husband, even when no one is there watching her. She is obedient to God and she guards that. Also, she guards his money when he is not there. Not squander it or allow others to squander it. حافظات للغيب, because God has guarded that. You see, obedient to God. Because God has guarded the chastity and the money. حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله. This is the first type of wife. Here, there is no mention of the husband at all. Good wife, with the good wives, husband are not mentioned. It's God who is mentioned. Then it comes to a second type of wife who is rebellious. النشوز. Nushuz is, nashaza is to rise in Arabic. Rise above what is expected. Rise above the norms that are expected. This is the second wife. But let those whose rebellion, I mean, we translate it, give as rebellious.
High-handedness.
High-handed, if you like. If you fear high-handedness from your wives, what do you do? And naturally, by the nature of things, there must be some women, some wives who are high-handed and not obedient and so on. What do you do with them? واللاتي تخافون فعظوهن. Remind them of God's teaching. This is wa'az, preaching or reminding of God's teaching. Tell to her that God has ordered us all to be obedient and to be decent and all that. That is for number one. If he's done that and it didn't work, goes on to another strategy, which is to sulk from her, not to speak to her in the bedroom. People normally translate this as send them to beds apart. This is not correct, according to what we know from the Arabic language and from the hadith of the prophets. But you see, show her that you are displeased and don't talk to her in the bedroom, not outside. Just when you are alone, shows your displeasure and disagreement with what she is doing. Can give proofs from the Arabic language that this hijra wahjuruhunna. People think hijra means to leave and go away and so on. It doesn't mean just that. It means when you stop talking to someone. في المضاجع, in the bedroom. Outside the bedroom, you should deal with each other decently in front of other people and talk to each other and so on. If this didn't work, we have two strategies here. If they didn't work, then they say, and hit them. Hit them. وَاضْرِبُوهُنَّ. Now, So many people say, how can men be allowed to do that? It is not. It is not. يعني, an order to men to hit them. Permission. We know from the Arabic language how things are expressed, and it's not an order, but you may be allowed to do this. You may be allowed to do this. And Muslim scholars normally say, well, it is a fact that there are some people who would not listen. If you give a woman a smack, she will stop.
Mhm.
Is that better or destroy the family? Yes,
So-
they say in some in some cultures this works.
So there were two strategies.
Two
About-
strategies. First one is to preach, to remind her of God's teaching.
Mhm.
Number two, to show her your displeasure by being silent in the bedroom. Don't talk to her.
Mhm.
Then, if this doesn't work, you may hit her. And everybody thinks, and if he understand from the history and so on, that this is just giving her a smack. And they say, well, there are women who may listen to reason by a smack, and that is better than يعني, abolishing, destroying the family or
So-
divorcing and so on. And in the Quran speaks to people
But-
who are يعني, it's time, true, but it's meant to be for all times
Mhm.
and all places and all culture.
There's a couple of things around this which
Yes.
lots of people have questions, but there's no thing. The verse continues after that to say,
Yes.
and if you fear them
Of course,
to be
yes,
split.
yes,
So this,
yes, of course, I'm coming to that.
okay.
Say, this is the, so if it is to all culture, in some culture this works. And there is another mechanism. In any case, all the fuqaha, scholars of religion said, if this is not going to work, if it brings the opposite effect, don't do it. And the Prophet ﷺ never hit any of his wife, and he always said to them, to people around him and in his time, يعني, gave very يعني, strong statement about those who hit their wives. He said, is any one of you not ashamed to hit your wife during the day and sleep with her during the night? Okay? So it is this, يعني, it showed that the tradition showed that it is not something that you can take easily and lightly. And then, in any case, there is another mechanism which up to now has been talking to the husband and the wife. Then it talks to the people around them, families, societies, or courts. Social workers now, it says, if you fear that there will be a breach, or there is a breach between a couple like this, then you should appoint an arbiter from her family and one from his family, and these two arbiters should meet and try to make things better, put things right between them. If they decide in the end that this is not possible, they would affect a divorce. Now, and the Quran says in another surah, I think it is in the same surah later on, to say, if they can't live amicably with each other, if they leave each other peaceably, God will give each of them something better. God promises to give each of them something better if they can't live together in a pleasant, nice way. Okay, so you have this mechanism. The mechanism of arbiters can start before even preaching, and before sulking with her, and before.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an extra strategy to avoid leaving the things until they have become so bad that the man would hit his wife. And as I said, the scholars say, so many cultures, in so many cultures, if you have a smack, and that will put you in the right mind, that's better for the family. I am a man, and in certain situations, if I find someone, my wife, I don't mind if my wife hits me, if this is going to bring me to my sins, and protect the family. Destroying the family is terrible.
Yes.
And I can tell you frankly that if I'm doing something terrible and my wife in her anger smacks me and this brings me to senses, I would be grateful to her after that for having.
There's a few questions around this that people ask. So one of them is, all of these things seem to happen. Okay, well, I'll put it this way. The first part is this: when it says you fear this,
Oh, yes.
it's not that they have done it, but you're fearing
Yes,
it.
good idea.
So the question is, now,
this is a very good question. It cannot be some simply thinking or having some notions that this might happen. No, because this is called dhann. Dhann is suspicion.
mhm.
And the Quran tells us in Surah Al-Najm, which I think is 53, that some suspicions are sinful. Tells all Muslims, بعد الظن إثم. Don't act on dhann. Must have. So the fear must be well established by behavior which is going on, not by simply thinking that she might.
I think when I've looked at this and I looked at comparable verses in the Quran, there's a verse about the word in here is khafa, okay, so to be afraid.
Oh, yeah.
But I was told that this, as you say, is not a fear in the same English. You can say fear, it could be an irrational fear, okay. But the word khafa is that it is fear of an established practice of behavior,
Yes.
or an explicit thing that is definitely going to happen. You know it's going to happen.
Absolutely.
So there's the verse that came, I looked at it, I can't remember the actual number, I'll look it up maybe. It says, it's talking about treaties and war and peace, okay, and it says if you fear betrayal from a party, then it says throw back the treaty to them. This is a very literal translation of it. So that you may be on equal terms.
Yes.
So if it's on equal terms, it must mean that they are essentially throwing the treaty back to you.
Yes.
So you're throwing it back to them is equivalent to them throwing it to you. So when you are khafa, you're fearing their betrayal. It is that they have told you they're going to betray you. They told you,
or
acted in a way that makes it very clear to you that they are planning to betray you. And so I think the translation of khafa in this context is perhaps better as threaten something. And it's as that they're threatening to do something, or the behavior is threatening you. And I think that, so that is it's important to stress this. It can't be an imagined fear. It's something established by a practice of behavior.
Very much so.
But then it also brings this idea of what is nushuz, and this is a big question. The linguistic meaning of it, you mentioned it, but there's other verses in the Quran that mention the word nushuz. So there's a thing that you have a gathering of people, and it says, so you can remember the verse. It says, "Fa'anshuzu." So
advising people how to sit together in a gathering, to make room for each other. So because these people used to come crowd around the Prophet
Yes.
and stay there for hours and hours and
Yes.
hours. Other people come in, they can't find a place. So it says make room. And if it is said to you,
Now leave.
Shuzu,
Yes, now leave.
yeah,
Now
leave,
get up and move.
leave.
Get up and leave.
Or give room anyway.
Or get out of your place. Right?
Yes.
Get out and move away.
Mm.
And there's another verse in the Quran that mentions it. There's only, I think, these three. Well, there's actually a fourth one. There's another one where it's talking about a donkey that is being brought out of the ground and resurrected.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And this donkey is anshaz. It comes
Yes.
from the bones are brought out
Up.
from their resting place
Yes.
and then clothed in flesh, and
Yes,
the
yes.
donkey is resurrected as a demonstration of Allah's ability to resurrect.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes.
And so this again is leaving their place and
Yes.
reforming the creature.
Mm.
So the first meaning there of leave your place and make space, or move out of your space, is again moving out of space. And the same thing with the donkey's bones, they move out of the earth and become flesh, covered in flesh again. And so this is the sense of moving out, moving away. And then there's also the verse which talks about it in the other way around, where a wife fears nushuz or irada from the husband. That's the third word. You know, if a woman fears nushuz or I think it's irada. I'm not sure about the wording, but it means neglect, I think. So nushuz or neglect from a husband, there is no blame if they have a settlement and they go the other way. So there is nushuz in both directions.
Oh yes, yes, indeed, yes.
But the meaning of this to me seems to be about abandoning the marriage. It's not about simply being rebellious.
It is serious things, you see. The problem is that people, if they want to hit their wives, if it is their habit or their culture, they hit their wives, they will hit them. And this happens in this country. You see how wife battering, and they call it, even a term for it. And women who are given refuge in houses. So it's happening. If women, if some men do that, they will do it. They are not waiting for the Quran to tell them.
Oh, sure. And in fact, this is the idea of when it was revealed is that this was happening, and this is the Allah is setting the limits and setting the rules, saying that you can't do it unless.
Yes.
And the thing about that is that it is, if you think about it, the way I understood this verse and the way I've looked at it is, if you're threatened with desertion. And in fact, Yusuf Ali translates the use of nushuz later on when talking about if women fear from the men nushuz, they either fear to be neglected or they fear desertion.
Yes.
So he translates nushuz in this second verse, in this second instance of its use, when it's talking about the woman fearing nushuz of the husband, not as rebelliousness. The woman isn't fearing the husband's being rebellious. She's fearing he may desert her. And so the meaning of it is to move out.
The translation of rebelliousness is just an easy word that comes to mind.
Yes.
But really is different.
But it's rebellious against the rights of the husband.
Yes.
Which means that she's stealing the rights of the husband instead of looking after them, which is the opposite. Yes. So what does it mean? So for example, if someone who you've put in charge of property steals it, this is a theft. Now the property is very important, so it may be your children. They take the children and run off. They take your property and run off. This is a big crime, and it's like if your children, if you're in a situation, maybe your children or someone you know who's close to you inside the family is threatening to do a crime, a serious crime, such as kidnap the children and take them off to another part of the world or whatever, then this is a serious crime. So if you fear this crime is happening, then you have actions to take to try and stop it.
Yes.
So then we have these three actions.
Yes.
The first one, the word is subtle. So what's the word again for the admonish is translated?
Wa'adh, you see from wa'adh.
Now, when I read up about this actually has a very specific meaning, is to warn people of the consequences of their action.
Yes. This is one of the meanings, yes.
So the idea is that it's not just tell them off or tell them it's a bad thing, but it's if they did this thing that they're threatening, then there are bad consequences.
And not by himself or the family, but God as well.
Oh, but the whole if you kidnap children, the police will be after you.
Yes.
All right. The government will be after you. You may end up in prison. And as for whether you ever find another husband, that's another question.
Yes,
if you do this to your husband, will anyone else want to marry you ever?
That's a very good question.
And then the question,
If I known that the wife I have had been
had run off from a previous husband, no divorce, no settlement,
in
just
that way, I would have hesitated greatly, but
Yes.
I did not hesitate for a moment.
but this issue then is and if you make it very specific, and I think it is very specific, it's a threat to betray, and to run off, and to abandon the rights of the husband she's supposed to be guarding.
Yes.
And this threat is made. Now it can be made physically
Yes.
or verbally,
Yes.
but it must be made.
And it is mentioned only once in the Quran, and in the middle of that context of guarding, trying to avoid it as much as possible. It's not only, see, look, I have been married for a long time. Never occurred to me to hate my wife. Not just me. You might think that I'm in London. No. I come from a large family in the village in Egypt. Many brothers. I have 9 brothers.
Mhm.
These brothers, some of them have PhDs in the highest places in universities and socially and so on, and some are farmers and things like that. And I have never seen or heard that any of them had hit his wife.
Indeed. And the thing about this verse,
And
actually,
they are all obedient to the Quran. I am obedient to the Quran. And
Sure.
because I am obedient to the Quran, I never hit my wife.
sure.
Because of I am being obedient to the
Sure.
Quran.
But it's all good. The thing about this, though, is that it's limiting the legitimate cases
Yes.
to only the case where a man is or a wife is threatening to steal his property, take his children, abandon
Or
the
doing
marriage
something serious. You see,
with
look,
no
listen,
recourse.
listen. We said that with a good wife, she guards her chastity. The bad wife must have some opposite of this.
Yes, and
See, we have this contrast going on all the time in the Quran. The good wives are obedient to God, guarding what God has guarded. God Himself has guarded, that is her chastity and the property and money of the family.
yes.
So,
And so
the
actually,
other one, the shoes must
there's a
include
contrast.
contrast.
And also, it's disobedient to God because it's
Yes.
taking what God has guarded.
Yes.
You know, and this is the point about what it is doing is committing a crime or threatening to commit a serious crime
Yes.
of running off, maybe finding another man and running off, whatever it is. but
Those
it's
people who do
significantly
it, they
different.
are not doing it because the Quran allowed them, because the British or the Irish or whatever here who batter their wives, they did not do it because the Quran allowed them to do it.
Yeah. The point really is that in law, if you say that what seems to be what should be the case is that the rule should be from the Quran is that it's only allowed in a situation whereby the woman is threatening to steal his property and run off and move out. Literally, the word "move out" is nushuz is very close to
Or
that.
not, the Quran says wives have rights to be maintained, and then he house her and maintain her and so on, and then she goes on with another man, still maintained and living in his house. This is ridiculous. It shouldn't be, one shouldn't just think of one-sided, say, how could you allow a husband to hit a
But
wife?
all of this, then you talk to the different mechanisms, and all of these things come together, and then it says at the end of it, and if you think there will be a breach, if you think there may be a split,
Yes.
then appoint arbitrators and find a solution, which may include divorce.
Yes.
So the idea is then that what is threatened is worse than divorce, because these
Yes.
are remedies for the threat.
Exactly.
So the implication is, what is the worst thing that can happen to a marriage than a divorce? is if they one party just runs off without giving any kind of settlement,
We
without any
sometimes
kind
make
of.
big mistakes. I have made big mistakes in my life. I would have been. I wish that my wife stopped me at that time by hitting me, giving me a smack. Or it would be great. Instead of suffering
Mhm.
the results of what I have done here and there. So what's the fuss about?
Yes, and I think when we talk about this idea of when to use force, now there's a question: if what someone is proposing doing is itself a use of force,
Oh
okay,
yes.
or that they may get themselves into worse trouble. I mean, I can remember, the kind of situations where I was. You fear that you have to use force as a parent, as a child is about to do something that would be really, really dangerous to their
Yes.
health, and if you didn't stop them, they would maybe run into the street and get hit by a car or
Yes.
something. And you bring them to their senses, maybe with a little slap or some, in English law, I think they call it reasonable sort of discipline or something like that to keep is allowed. Because if you didn't, then they would do this. And I just see this with the cats. Just a simple example. They communicate by tapping. It may be light, but it's enough to say you've gone too far now.
Yes.
If you get too close to the cat,
Yes.
they'll hit you and say, okay, no, that's enough. Don't tickle my tummy. Don't stroke me there or whatever. and they use it as a means to communicate. And people do it. All animals do it, and humans are no exception. So so animals, they do this.
Yeah.
They communicate like this. It's a way of saying you've gone far enough.
Yeah.
That's it. And it may just be a little tiny tap, where the cat will not get its claws out or anything.
Meant to happen once in a lifetime or twice or.
Yeah. It's and it can. The point is, it's not needed. But I think also the Quran is limiting it very explicitly, because I'll tell you another thing. There are three kind of escalations. The first is a verbal warning.
Yes.
The next one is kind of keeping away from them in their bedroom.
Yes.
That's the idea. And then what is, so these two steps are then precursors to the last step, which is maybe hit. Okay.
Yes.
But then and even then that there's a divorce potentially, as well as an avoidance of this threatened behavior.
Yes.
But this, to tell you about this, verbally it can be quick. It can be a few minutes, all right? But if you abandon them in the bedroom, this is something that will take, to have an effect on people.
Yes.
It may take days or weeks, all right? So whatever's being threatened, okay, it's not an act of anger.
No.
It's something that must be done after you've tried things for weeks to try and bring the situation, remedy the situation. So it's not like someone comes home and they get angry and they hit the wife and that's fine. No, you have to go through these escalation steps to show that these have not had any effect. And then even if the woman is still making the threats after, if you've tried all these things, then you should have appoint arbitrators and have a settlement, which is better than this thing happening. Because to have the threat of the woman simply abandoning the rights of the husband and stealing those rights is a far worse thing than to have a settled divorce where people go their own way and everyone gets it's all fairly arbitrated. So this is the concept. I think it limits it very much. I don't know whether in practice, I don't think in practice that the courts, the Islamic courts, have really interpreted that way, but I think it must be that you can only use these escalating means of annoyance, as it's described.
Life is full of
after a lot of time.
Strange situations in one place, in all places, in all cultures, over the ages. So you can't say never throughout history should a man hit his wife.
Or just generally about...
Or incidentally should a wife hit the man.
Yes.
But I haven't said this in front of my wife that I welcome her. But it's sadly, if a husband has gone too far and he could be brought back to his sense, to save him from his foolishness, which will be ruinous to him and to the family, by a smack from the wife, after which they get happy together and so on. No problem.
Yeah, I think this is an important verse that some people really do struggle with to understand. And
I know, you see, everybody thinks that this is, they think of that and think this is the Quran and there is nothing else.
There are other things to mention about this. Like there's a hadith, I think the Prophet said, I can't imagine that hit being anything more than a tap with a toothbrush.
Oh yeah.
Which is to say that it's a very symbolic tap or hit, to have that sense of you know, you've now crossed the line. This is this, you can't go further than this. And then, you know, the next step is you know, the community needs to get involved. And I think when, you know, that someone is threatening to do a crime which will end them up in prison potentially, or end up in a much more violent situation, there is a legitimate case of using a much lesser means of violence to stop someone doing a bigger violation of rights. And this is a way of keeping the person safe. It's like if you're keeping a child safe from running into the street, it's a way of keeping someone safe by showing them this is the end. You know, when a cat comes to give you a warning shot, you know, it's to say, you know, if you do more than that, you know, I will defend myself. You know, or the society will defend my rights with the force of law. The police will be around to arrest you if you kidnap the kids.
Yes.
Okay. So, alhamdulillah, thank you very much. It's been a useful discussion. Hopefully other people will find it useful.
I hope so.
And I know it's a controversial one.
Yes.
And there are many more controversial verses which people like to talk about.
We can talk about that sometime.
Another time maybe.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We'll stop the recording there, inshallah.
Salam. Bismillah.